and gentlemen, may I remind everybody present that the meeting will be recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Just a little bit of protocol. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, please put their hand up. If they can't put their hand up, i.e. in Nick's case or whatever, Nick, shout loud, or use the chat if you can. If somebody is having difficulty hearing, please let myself or a Democratic officer know as soon as possible. If they do have a webcam and they're having trouble with the sound, please try turning your webcam off, because this quite often helps your bandwidth and improves the sound. But fingers crossed, we're all getting the hang of this now. So that's the formalities done. I'll go on to the agenda. The first on the agenda is apologies for absence, and the only one I've got is Margarita Wright. Anybody else got any apologies?
I got an announcement to make. All right.
Yes.
John, Rhiannon is having problems with the link in getting in, and therefore she will join us when she can.
Super. Thank you, Mark.
Join in now, Councillor Wilson.
Okay. She's still having problems connecting into the system. Okay. All right. I'll try and give her a hand in a second. All right. So where are we?
Ben, you've got a point?
Yeah, sorry. I thought that only members were part of this meeting until we were calling members of the public.
Well, they're normally there to listen, but they're not put on screen. So if I could ask our officers, Democratic officers, to sort that out. Basically, they just need to turn their cameras off and mics off so they can watch us, but we can't watch them.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Mark?
Yeah, I'm just helping with the I think you're in now.
We've got some feedback, so again, I'll remind people if they're not speaking, can they mute?
Are you in now? I can check.
Okay, so next one is the minutes of the meeting. You've all
There you are. Owen.
Sorry? Did somebody move something then? No? Okay, you've all had your papers for just over a week. Are you all happy that I saw
minutes? Move me note.
Okay, who moved and who seconded?
Either me and Andrew, I think it was, wasn't it?
Right,
Yeah,
Neil,
I
moved, seconded. Thank you. I will do that in due course. Okay, item 3 is to receive declarations of interest, please. Any declarations?
Yes. Okay. When we discussed some of these applications, I was as member of the Penarth Town Council Planning Committee, and I look at the matters afresh. Okay, in relation to number item 2020 00257 and 2020 00511.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. Anybody else got any declarations?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. I'd like to make the same points. The planning applications 2020 00257, 2020 00511. As a member of the Planning Committee on Penarth Town Council, I will look at those afresh should they arise.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and welcome to the meeting. Are you on the phone, Rhiannon? Rhiannon, are you on the phone or are you on the...
I can't hear.
Sorry? We're having difficulty with Rhiannon and her connection. Mark, you're obviously not in the same building as Rhiannon.
I will look and see how she's getting on. I think I'll be back in a moment. Okay.
Can I be back with you? So we'll start to move through the applications then.
Leave your stuff there, Mark.
I will do. Don't worry, Neil. I've got my stuff with me.
No, I mean the camera.
Yeah, will do.
Okay, right. That takes us on to the main part of the agenda then, agenda item 4, planning applications. And the first one on the list is 2020 00257 4 Arkos Street. We do have a public speaker on this, Dr. Kassam. No, I'm right.
That's
Yes, I am. But Vicky is going to run through the application for us, and then I will ask Dr. Kassam to speak after that. So I'll hand over to Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to just wait a moment for Councillor Wilson and Birch as PNAF members? If they don't hear everything I say, they won't be able to vote. So I'm happy to sort of wait a minute or so until they're both on, unless if you want me to carry on, I will, but I'm just conscious they won't be able to participate if they don't hear the whole debate.
Okay, I can hear everything now.
Excellent. We need Mark back in situ now. Mark?
Yes, I'm here now. I sorted out the
Super,
issue.
thank you very much.
Everyone needs paused. Okay, it's okay now.
Yeah, we're all going.
Yes, we are.
Vicky's going to start on 4 Arcot Street then.
Great, okay. So I'm assuming you can all hear me. If you can't, if you just wave at me, hopefully I'll see you. I'm going to share my screen so that you can have a look at the photographs while I'm talking. Can you see my screen? Please someone say yes, because I can't actually see you now that I'm sharing the plan.
Yes.
Great. Lovely. So this is the building. Hopefully members will have received a copy of all of these plans as well, and you've had time to have a look through them. The application site relates to number 4 Arcot Street in Penarth, which is on the corner of Arcot Street and Ludlow Street. And this is an existing building. The planning application relates to the ground floor and the lower ground floor, which is currently vacant, having last been used as a community facility. There is a flat at the first floor, but that's outside of the application site. Hopefully you can see the photographs in front of you. This application is to convert the existing building to form a further 4 flats, that being 3 2-bedroom flats and 1 1-bedroom flat. You can see from these photographs, this is a typical traditional terrace street, 2-storey property, but as I've alluded to, there's a sort of basement level here that's part of the conversion. You can see the condition of the interior and exterior in some of these photos. The plan is to convert this with access at the rear for a sort of shared area for bin store and cycle store. Obviously, the nature of the property means there's no on-street parking available, off-street parking available, so it would be relying on parking within the street. I think that's it in terms of sharing the plans. Just to advise members, this application is being considered by Planning Committee following a call-in request from Councillor Neil Thomas. We're raising some concerns around the level of amenity space and parking, and no doubt Councillor Thomas will be able to discuss his concerns in more detail as part of the debate. So I think I'll leave it there, and I know we've got a public speaker, so I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Vicky. Okay, Mark, could we have Dr. Kassam up and live, please? And could he, when he's there, confirm that he can hear and we can hear him?
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Kassam. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Great, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, right. You have 3 minutes. I will hand over to you now. And once you've finished, if you could put your mic on mute again and just stay there in case we need to clarify anything until we've just run through what you've said. So over to you.
Great, good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chairman, Councillors. So my name is Dr. Kassam, together with my wife, Emily Kassam. We are directors of IKEC Property in Cardiff, and we are the applicants for the proposed development at number 4 Arcot Street. All I wanted to say really was that obviously the premises has been empty for a good while, and it is in quite a bad state of disrepair with extensive refurbishment work required. The proposed reuse of the building, especially with regards to the rapidly deteriorating lower ground floor, will be highly compatible with the residential surroundings and greatly improve the appearance of the area, as well as the existing first floor apartment all providing high quality accommodation for prospective tenants. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. If you'd just like to hang on there while I check with our planning committee members if anybody wants any clarification questions. Anybody? No? Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kassam. You're more than welcome to sit and listen to us, but unfortunately we're going to turn your means of communication off now.
Councillor Thomas has his hand up.
Councillor Thomas, you would like to come in. Obviously, you called this in, and I believe you're the local member. You're muted, Neil. No, still muted.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
Sorry,
it.
my mouse was being very unresponsive. Yeah, no, yeah, and it's in my ward, so which is and it was sent to me as a part of the original consultations, and I voiced concerns, as Vicky said. I mean, I agree this site is in need of development, and the change of use to residential. I don't actually oppose that. However, I do have a number of concerns. Firstly, the lack of amenity space. I accept that this is difficult to achieve at this location, but given the small size of the building, achieving 4 flats with 7 bedrooms in total is, to my mind, too cramped. The size of each dwelling and the rooms they're in are too small, and I believe this is overdevelopment. Secondly, as you can see from the photographs, parking is, if you look at the photographs that Vicky put up earlier, the very first photograph, the overhead view, the Google Street View one, showed that parking is already fully occupied. No, not that one, the one there, that one. If you enlarge that, you'll see that that actually the street parking in that area is already pretty fully occupied. And to say that this is not going to put an added burden on the area is misleading in the least. The previous use did not actually use much parking, despite what it says in the report, as most of its customers came from the immediate neighbourhood and did not use their cars. The exception being when the larger function took place, and then it was catch as catch can as far as parking was concerned. You'll also notice that in terms of there are a number of businesses around that area as well, which use parking. Thirdly, once again, we're being told that the development will be unviable if required to pay the rightful amount of Section 106. Under the legislation, developers are required to re-look at their plans and consider alternative proposals that would allow them to fulfill their community responsibilities. I can see no evidence that this has happened yet again. This is an example of a development attempting to cram as much into a smaller space as possible, with a view to maximising profit and minimising their responsibilities. Is there potential, Vicky, to claw back the contributions due to the community if it goes ahead, and what oversight is available to the council to examine the actual costs and profits when the properties are marketed to get the actual costs rather than the disputable costs and profits that are presented to us or to the department by the applicants. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. I'll ask Vicky to respond to those. I think I know the response to most of them already, but I'm sure Vicky has got responses to those. Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you. If I pick up on the amenity space concerns to start with, and I agree with you that it's far from ideal to have such a small area of amenity space to serve a flatter development. But these types of properties we see a lot of in our larger urban towns. We see a lot of developments like this in Barry, for example. And when you're converting an existing building and you're stuck with the limits of an existing plot, there is very little that you can do about that. There are times when we refuse planning applications where it is impossible to provide any access to any amenity space. So if there's no access for a bin store or anything like that, we have refused applications on those grounds. But what we tend to do is try and balance those issues, and in sites like this where they've done all they can really to deliver the absolute bare minimum, you balance that around the availability of local outdoor space that can be used, and there is quite a lot of outdoor space in the local area of Penarth that people would have access to in terms of public parks, and that's set out in the report. That we think on balance it wouldn't be reasonable to refuse the redevelopment of this property on the grounds of lack of a larger area of garden space. The parking issue is one we're all familiar with, and I don't disagree that there is high demand for parking in the Penarth area. Again, similar issues to these kind of conversions in Barry that we see. It comes down to the arguments of planning policy, which, as you all know, is pushing us in the direction of maximum rather than minimum parking standards. If something is in a sustainable location and there are alternatives to using a car, like quite clearly there are in Penarth, or very close to a whole host of local services and facilities, employment and public transport here, you don't need to own a car to live here, and car ownership levels are lower in this type of property in 1 and 2 bedroom flats. And for all those reasons, it would be unreasonable to refuse an application in this kind of location for this kind of property on the grounds of no available off-street parking. Furthermore, we've got an existing established use which has a higher demand for parking, as I set out in the report. And I take your point, Councillor, about it depends on the type of occasion and so on. But we really would be struggling at a planning appeal if we tried to argue that this was unacceptable in terms of the lack of available parking. And I'm sure members can recall appeal decisions where we have lost those arguments quite severely. And I'm thinking of the United Reformed Church in Barry as a relatively recent example, where there was an established use with an established parking requirement there. There was an awful lot of opposition in that case from the public because of the concerns about parking, but the appeal inspector was very clear about it. And I don't see any difference here in terms of those arguments, really. So we need to be mindful of that. And then lastly, just picking up on the Section 106 viability issues. As a starting point, I would remind members that those policies are set at a local development plan level, at a very strategic level, and are really what we would hope to get in a best case scenario. They're what we pushed very hard for through the local development plan examination to make sure we were getting the most out of developers when it comes to Section 106 requirements. But they are not going to work, and they are not going to be viable when you're looking at constrained urban sites like this. And I know the Penarth members are frustrated that there have been a number of sites in your area where that turned out to be the case, but it's because of the type of development that you're seeing here. It's an existing building that needs a lot of refit. I know that you want to come in, but let me address the point in the whole, and then you can come back and ask another question if that's okay. My starting point is we set the bar very high, and on certain sites like this that it's not going to be viable. We check that, but through rigorous checking of the viability appraisals that are submitted to us, and we do that by looking at their costs and their expected sales values and so on. They're checked by our qualified officers in estates and our land division to check that everything is as it should be, and we go through that process. Having done that, it is then not reasonable to impose clawbacks, which is what you suggested, Councillor Thomas, and planning policy is very clear around that there are only certain circumstances where it's appropriate to impose a clawback, and that would be where the viability is only not viable now for a particular reason, for a particular point in time. So if the market was particularly suppressed at this current time, if we were in a severe recession that was impeding the housing market and we were expecting it to bounce back next year, that's when you might do a clawback. Or similarly, if costs were exceptionally high at the moment for some particular reason, and you'd expect them to be lower in a year or two's time. Those kind of occasions would mean that we would impose clawbacks. We have done on developments like Barry Waterfront that were 10 years in the offing, so you could expect those costs to vary quite significantly over that time period, but it's not the norm to do it, and we wouldn't be allowed to do it as the norm. Planning policy and the regulations don't allow us to do that. So developers go into development with an element of risk, and that's why they are entitled to have a profit. And you know, that's the case here. All we can do is try and assess that information at this point in time, do that robustly, which we always do. And if it proves that the thing will not be viable, then I'm afraid we have to live with that and just consider whether it's acceptable in planning terms, having considered all that information.
Thank you, Vicky. Neil, I can see you bouncing up and down there. I'll let you come back just shortly, but just
2 points to come back onto Vicky.
2 seconds. I just need to clarify to Vince Driscoll, Rhiannon Birch and Mark Wilson that I've seen your messages. I have messaged you back, and I know you all want to speak, so it'll be Vince after, and then Rhiannon, and then Mark. Right, Neil, quick come back on.
2 points I want to come back to with Vicky. First of all, you didn't talk about the requirements when plans are not are put in that are not viable, for some indication that the developers have looked at ways around it and to come up with alternatives that are viable. And secondly, you haven't talked about the fact that this development, in my view, is an overdevelopment. There's too much and too small a space. We're only talking about 2 floors, the ground floor and the sub-ground floor. That we're not, the pictures of the building are misleading in that the top floor is not part of this. We're talking about quite a limited space with quite a lot going on in there, and the rooms in the property are cramped and tiny.
Neil, just may I remind you that we do go through this very regularly with you on the Section 106, and it is a little tiring sometimes when we're going over the same points time and time again.
I can appreciate that, John, but it doesn't make them wrong.
No, I know that, but you know the answers, and you know the reasons why it is, and you know, it sometimes a lot of this is not necessary. But Vicky, did you want to respond to that, or shall I ask Vince to come in now?
No, I'm happy to respond to those points. You're quite right. I did miss the point about overdevelopment, but it really comes down to the issue of, is there enough parking? Is there enough amenity space when we talk about overdevelopment? So in addressing those 2 points, you know, we've assessed this application. Yes, you're right, that the units proposed are relatively small, but there's a market for that. People, you know, some people can only afford to live in a small unit like this, and it's an opportunity for them to enter the housing market with this type of unit if they choose to. That's what the housing market is all about, and it's not a planning matter to say that the property is too small if you know, if they can meet the basic requirements, which is what I'd addressed earlier. You know, I can see you disagree with us, but that's the conclusion that planning officers have come to, so I can't really say more than that. The point about alternatives, you alluded to the regulations requiring developers to consider alternatives. I'm afraid that's not quite right. There are no regulations that require developers to do that. There is one Welsh Government document that talks about Section 106 viability that suggests that if a developer is doing something that's quite obviously going to mean exceptional development costs that aren't reasonable, or lower than normal sales values, for example, then we would reasonably negotiate with them to say, well, hang on a minute, you're building mansions here when actually you could get a much better profit if you were building, you know, normal family housing. That sort of scenario, by way of example, would be where we would enter into negotiations. Here, you know, an existing building that can only reasonably be converted for residential in this kind of development, you know, that there aren't any reasonable alternatives that I can suggest other than what you've alluded to, and perhaps fewer units, but I'm not sure that would increase developers' profit or increase the viability in this case. In fact, I'd expect it to do the opposite. So, you know, I don't think, again, it would be reasonable to be going back to the developer in this case on viability grounds to be seeking amendments to the proposal.
Thank you, Vicky. Okay, Vince Driscoll, please, could you come in with your question?
Yeah, it's more of a point really, John. I don't share Councillor Thomas's frustration with the 106. We've been quite fortunate in this powers. However, I don't like the way he put his argument across to Dr. Kazam. It came across as the developer was acting disreputable, and either Neil has got figures to suggest that the guy is not telling the truth, or he's just made it up, because I think you came across as very rude, Neil. That's my point, John.
I do take your point, Vince. I mean, that is something we all ought to be aware of, is how we do come across, because we are a public body and we have the public involved with us. But do you have any questions on the application, Vince, or is it just the point?
No, sorry, John, it was just a point.
Okay, thank you, and taken on board, very much so. Rhiannon Birch, you have a question?
I'd like to agree with what some of what Councillor Thomas said. I am concerned about the 106 monies. I know we go over this again and again, but I feel that developers are choosing to do these very small developments in order to evade their responsibilities on Section 106. I'm not really worried about the parking. I'm not really worried about the size of the developments, because I think, you know, caveat emptor, people choose what they buy, and that's their lookout, basically. If you choose to live in the middle of the town, you can't expect to park outside your own property. But I am concerned about the Section 106. And what I'd like is if we could have much clearer guidelines on what attracts or what would be appropriate to apply Section 106 monies, or rather property development that would be needs to have 106 monies taken from them. Now, I'm not expressing myself very well this afternoon, but that's what I'm looking for, the criteria.
I think you are, and I fully understand where you're coming from. I know you're new on planning this time round. I know you've been on planning before, but we have and do run training on this 106, especially because it is a very hot topic. And perhaps in the new year, we can run, whether it be a remote or whatever, because it is a very complex and difficult subject about 106 and parking. They seem to come up very regularly, and perhaps I could ask Vicky, I'm sure she'd be willing to do it for us, that we could run another training session fairly early in the new year, just to keep everybody up to date with 106 matters. Is that okay, Vicky? I see you nodding.
I'd be very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and point noted on that one. And then Mark, Mark, you wanted to come in, Mark.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. Couple of issues there. First of all, what I was also interested, which seems to be lacking in the report, about 106 contributions to community facilities, considering this application is a change of use application from a community facility to housing. So I wondered if that's been considered at all, because I can't see that in the report. That's one point. And the second point here, I just wondered about trees. This area really lacks trees, and I wonder perhaps, is there anything we could do to improve the location of it? Because it is very much like lots and lots of housing with very little trees, and I think it actually would improve the landscape of the area if there were some trees. I wonder perhaps if we could look at that in terms of applications like this. I would also welcome the opportunity that Councillor Rhiannon Birch said about making sure that we do have probably some studies on viability appraisals, proper studies, so that we can see for ourselves, because this often comes up at Penarth Town Council meetings about 106 contributions and why were those areas where we could get them, where there's areas they couldn't. So I do think we do need a bit of training on this, and I think it'd be very useful and insightful for all members to attend such a session.
Jonathan, you're on mute.
I couldn't hear you, Jonathan.
Yes, sorry. All the buttons and things to press and messages. Ben has said he wants to come in after this, but there's a few points I'd like Vicky to come back to you on, Mark. Obviously, loss of community facility and trees were the two main points you were making. And yes, I agree. I think training is vital in this, and it is an ever-changing world and whatever. So we will do our best to get some training sorted in the new year on these issues. Vicky, please, if you could.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillors Wilson and Birch are obviously both new to Planning Committee, having been on it many years ago, but are relatively new to Planning Committee. And we did do quite an in-depth session on Section 106 with all the other members of Planning Committee probably 12 months ago. So I shall circulate those slides at least for the time being, so that you've got a bit of information. But certainly we can do another training session as soon as possible. If you'd been at that training session, you'd be aware that community facilities actually the normal trigger for Section 106 requirements. For most things, it hits in at 10 dwellings, a net gain of 10 new dwellings. For community facilities, it's slightly higher, it's 25. So we wouldn't be expecting community facility contributions normally on a development of only 4 new flats. Having regard to the fact that it's a loss of an existing community facility, now that might have prompted us to ask for community facilities contribution if the loss of community facility in itself was considered to be harmful and unacceptable. Now the report does set out why we don't consider that to be the case in this particular scenario, having regard to the quality and availability of the existing space, but also what our background paper says in terms of overall levels of community facilities in this locality. So it's not a case that community facilities contribution would be justified here simply because of the loss of a community facility. But even if it was, we'd still have the issues around viability, which would mean that we wouldn't be able to seek it because of viability reasons. So hopefully that addresses that point. The point about trees is an interesting one because there's no trees on the existing site and the site is very constrained, as we've talked about. There isn't really the availability or opportunity to have trees planted within the application site. I would say our new tree SPG, which we did about a year ago, certainly provides a bit more of a rigorous approach to how we consider applications to remove trees, applications that might affect trees, both within application sites and outside application sites. And we are looking more and more at sort of innovative ways to increase tree coverage wherever we can. We've recently negotiated with a developer who unlawfully removed protected trees to get significant contributions for them to be able to plant trees off-site and on-site by way of compensation. We are very much aware of the council's declaration of a climate emergency, and we are doing all we can to use planning powers to protect existing trees and to plant new trees, and we'll continue to do so. But I don't think this is an opportunity, I'm afraid, for this particular development in which we could reasonably do that. I think that was everything.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Ben wanting to speak, and I believe Andrew Parker is looking to speak as well. So I'll ask Ben to come in next, Ben Gray, and then Andrew Parker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the other contributions members have made. I do feel we've perhaps strayed away from the application and started talking about wider policy considerations, and perhaps we don't really have a vehicle for discussing those regularly away from planning applications. Having looked at the application and the report and the various conditions, I'm happy to move officer recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder to that? Yeah, I can see Christine and Andrew putting their hands up, so thank you both. Andrew, did you want to come in, or were you just seconding?
Well, I was going to second, but also I was just going to comment. Obviously, a lot has been mentioned about the design and the layout. Having looked at it very carefully, the fenestration on the existing building is such that really it would only lend itself to small scale units, because the width and the size of the building inside is such that really the scheme that's been put forward is probably the only viable one, and that's the reason I'm seconding it.
Okie doke, thank you.
You're muted. Muted.
Yeah, sorry, back again. Sorry, we've given that a good old run through. I think we've covered everybody's points and woes. We've had a mover and a seconder. Vicky wants to come back in before we take it to a vote, so I'll let Vicky come in just for a minute. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to remind Councillor Williams, welcome. I know that you were a bit late to the meeting, so I'm assuming that you haven't heard the full debate, and just reminding you not to participate in the vote at all.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm sure Eddie will respond to that. Eddie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I put that in the chat that I've listened only past the discussion, so I put in there that I'm not voting on this application. Okay,
so,
thank you.
That leads us to the vote then, and unfortunately it's a little bit of a laborious process. Well, I will try the quick way. Are there any people who are dissenters to going with officer's recommendation? Yes, Neil. Okay, so we need to vote on it. So I'll start, and I will take mine as a for officer's recommendation. The next one is Councillor Ben Gray. Please, could I have your vote?
For officer recommendations.
Okay, the next one is Rhiannon Birch, please.
Abstain.
The next one is Christine.
For.
Thank you, Christine. Pam Drake.
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Vince Driscoll.
For.
Thank you. Stuart Edwards.
For officer recommendations.
Thank you. Nick Hodges.
For.
Thank you, Nick. Ian Johnson.
For the officer recommendations.
Thank you. Gordon Kemp.
For.
Thank you. Andrew Parker.
For, sorry, difficult to unmute. For.
Thank you. Leighton Rowlands.
For.
Thank you. Neil Thomas.
Against.
Thank you, Neil. Margaret Wilkinson. No, Margaret not online.
Yeah, she's had problems connecting. Sorry, Chair.
Okie doke. So I'll put an absent on Margaret then. And then we've got Mark Wilson.
Against.
Thank you, Mark. And Margarita is absent as well. So thank you all. That is unanimous for officer's recommendation.
Not unanimous.
No, not unanimous. Sorry, it is. There were 2 votes against, and all the others were a very much a majority vote. So we will move on to the next one, which is 2020-00511, Unit 4 Beechcliff, and Steve Butler is going to lead us through this. Steve, we do, I believe, have a public speaker on Beechcliff. No, we don't. No, we don't. I'm wrong. We do have late reps or whatever we call them these days. I still can't get used to others, but I'll hand over to Steve now.
Okay.
He will lead us through the application.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, there's we've had a matters rising note on this application, mainly from local residents. They've just really want to emphasise their concerns in relation to the impact that the takeaway would have on the character and the amenity of the Esplanade in terms of occupiers and both visitors to the seafront as well. It goes on to raise concern that some of the members may not be fully aware of the detriment to the area that the takeaway element has. So Vicky's helpfully put up a site location plan. So I think we all know the site, which is Beechcliff in the Esplanade, Penarth. This is the 3-storey building that's been renovated over the last sort of 10 years. So the application itself is to one of the units, which is Unit 4, is approved as an A3 unit. So this as part of the 2013 consent, planning permission was granted subject to a condition restricting its use as a takeaway. So this application is merely to consider the acceptability of the takeaway from Unit 4. What the application also does is it the application actually covers the whole of the building, and also is also seeking to regularise the fume and odour extraction on the other A3 units, and also some of the shopfront detailing and architectural detailing as well. So the application has kind of a more of a mopping up exercise on the other matters, but so the main issue really is the consideration of the takeaway facility in the. If Vicky, perhaps can you call up the floor plan of the. So just if Vicky can slightly zoom in. At the moment, you can see that there's, if you remember the photo before, on the left-hand side, there was a servery hatch onto the pavement. So that's where the takeaway is taking place at the moment. But it's a unit of quite some size with a number of tables within it. And there's also the main serving area within the building. So again, looking at the planning history, there was no actual reason given from a highways point of view or an environmental health point of view in relation to restricting its takeaway. This is something that the officer put on the 2013 application. I guess not really knowing what type of units would operate from any of the units. So just very briefly, I'm sure the questions will be asked on this, but in terms of takeaways, the main issues would normally be traffic generation, highway safety, and also odour and pollution and noise and disturbance. So just very briefly, the Council's Highways team have considered it, and they've looked at the existing parking availability and the short stay parking as well along the Esplanade, and they consider that the takeaway element from the existing and approved A3 unit wouldn't have a material impact along the adjacent highway. In terms of pollution control, there's been quite a lot of to and froing with pollution control. I mean, it's safe to say that when the application originally came in, they weren't happy with the control of odours from the property. Obviously, the use itself is classified as a high intensity cooking, and there's requirement to install pre-filters and old odour filters and abatement. So I think as the application processed along, and actually quite recently, the extraction system has been upgraded. We've now got detailed plans. The officer for environmental health has been out there. He's noted and assessed how it's working on site, and he's happy, as set out in page 19 of the report, that based on what's been installed, subject to that being maintained and retained, that he has no concern in relation to odours from the property. So if I can, I'll just leave it there, and then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Lovely, thank you, Steve. Well, this was called in by my Vice Chairman, Ben, and I believe Ben is the local member. So I'll hand over to Ben. I guess you want to ask or talk on this, Ben?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Steve, for taking us through that. I want to give a bit of context to my reason for calling it in. As we can see on page 21, there were 30 individual letters of representation sent into the council regarding this, and I will speak to the ones which have a planning consideration. Clearly, there are a number of points there that fall outside consideration of planning, and I understand the licensing committee have already considered a number of different issues on the site in determining their applications and made amendments as per their representations. The nature of the Esplanade in Penarth to this point has been one of takeaway counters at the entrances to the pier and on the pier, and sort of a walk up nature, and then along that stretch of redeveloped buildings, the class of use designed for kind of eating in and taking the time to spend time in those buildings. And I think the residents are particularly concerned about the nature of the environment, the street scene, the feel of that as a result of what has changed. Now, clearly, COVID-19 and the temporary lifting of considerations around changes of use led to a situation where we had at times hundreds of people waiting to queue up for that particular serving hatch out onto the path, and a considerable amount of waste generated. Now, I don't know that is representative of the future, and I'm not going to you know, in both senses, we shouldn't use the COVID-19 argument to either for or against for it. The fact that they've moved to takeaway when they didn't have a class of use for it, but it was COVID, we shouldn't hold that against them. But equally, the fact that there hasn't really been a chance for this as its previous use to prove itself. You know, this was welcomed by residents down there when they were looking at it as a restaurant that might do the occasional takeaway, but primarily it was a sit-in fish and chip restaurant, as opposed to the other operations that are already in existence. And certainly some of the points related that weren't necessarily planning points around the way the public have behaved mirrors the fact that the Esplanade in Penarth maybe doesn't have the same facilities as the resort area of Barry Island for handling the large groups of people using toilets or the large number of bins. On page 19, with regard to the fumes, there was, although the officer notes 15th of October at the bottom of page 19 that the new design is in order, there are still complaints outstanding, and that's noted in there. You know, residents above this setting are still experiencing life above a takeaway when they thought they were going to be living amongst restaurants. And you know, we welcome the sort of the tapas restaurant that's come in. This is going to be a fish and chip restaurant. There's a bar there, but the whole nature and feel of the street has changed. And so this is why it was called in. I think it was important to look at it in the context of the wider area. I note what the conservation officer has said in the report. I note what the officers are saying, but I do want to draw attention to what was in the matters arising letter when asking about if this is going to be for approval. Can we condition around how that serving hatch opening up onto the street is used? Because I mean, in their own plans, they've got ice cream there, but we all know that's just their main point now. To distribute this out. So I think it changes the nature of how that run of buildings looks and how the area is used. And I think that's the important point I'd like covered really by the officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments, Councillor Gray. You know, I think we do accept that the nature of the Esplanade has slightly changed with COVID, and I think a few things are up in the air in the way that restaurants are utilising seating on the highway, etc. I mean, there are a number of eateries. The pier as well. Obviously, they have facilities, and I think you have to look at the historic use of, prior to this site being redeveloped, Rabiotti's, for example. They had serveries, I think, directly onto the pavement as well. So it's something we're certainly mindful of, and I know the officer assessed in the report the potential to prevent the highway, a servery hatch directly onto the pavement. But I mean, something that, for example, environmental health haven't really necessarily supported that, and equally the Highway Authority haven't either. I mean, it is in terms of footfall. There are going to be peak times where it's going to be a busy area, and I don't think that the takeaway facility in itself would be a particular attractor over and above the existing sort of promenade area that people are walking along. Just again, in terms of the use, just again to emphasise, in terms of odor, I know there are still complaints. I have spoken to the officer on that matter today, and I think one of the complainants has been one of the complaints has been somewhat bottomed out, but all I can emphasise is if this takeaway facility didn't exist, there would still be cooking of the fish and chips. There would still be cooking odours associated with it. You might argue that, obviously, with a greater sort of throughput with takeaway facilities, that could be intensified somewhat. But from a technical point of view, we've been told that they are satisfied with the odours. Now, whether or not you can still smell the odour and it come within the regulations, that might be a different matter. But from a technical approval point of view, our SRS team have advised us that that they're actually happy with that. I mean, the condition does require that these filters are maintained and retained, because that's an important thing to make sure they do work, because they do build up with grease, etc. Again, the concern in relation to litter, etc. There's a condition that requires, and the applicant has agreed, for a number of bins to be sited outside the shop. That will take sort of address the concerns in relation to litter. Again, it does appear to be that there's a peak period, you know, probably 2 or 3 weeks in the summer months where there is a problem. And I think to some extent as well, when we move into winter, whether that servery hatch will actually be open, I would imagine in the middle of winter that's not going to be open because there'll be people eating inside, and I think that if the takeaway service does continue, that they'll probably be going inside the unit to pick up their fish and chips. It's just the nature of in the middle of summer you would have it open, and also I think that was tandem with serving ice cream from the same kiosk front as well. So you know, I think the officers, you know, the report does go through the issues, and I know there's lots of concerns. We do have a number of objections, but a lot of those are really revisiting issues that we can't reopen because the fact that it's an approved A3U. So we are just looking at the impacts of that takeaway facility, which is essentially the impact on highway safety and any additional impacts in relation to noise and disturbance and odours from the takeaway facility, which, given the footfall in that area, is as this report says, is very, very minimal. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I've got a couple of people wanted to come in now. First is going to be Neil Thomas, then Christine Cave, and then Andrew Parker. So over to you, Neil.
Yeah, first, thanks, Chair. First, I'd like to challenge some of the wording on page 20. I don't believe that any of the fish and chip related waste came from me. If you look under waste management, the first paragraph in italics, it seems to say that it did. It's just very unfortunate wording. However, the amount of Ben's quite right. I mean, both I don't know why, because it's not my ward, but I have received a lot of correspondence over the last few months about this fish and chip takeaway from residents, local residents, complaining about a number of issues, including antisocial behaviour of people queuing and drinking while they were queuing, and allegedly drunken behaviour there, and it got. I know that the police have been involved and been down there and spoken with the owners of the business as well, but it has been and remains a concern to the local residents. The amount of littering since this along the promenade there, along the esplanade, has increased in a geometrical progression. It is hugely over-littered down there now. I know that other outlets down there, one bit further to the south, send a member of staff out to pick up litter, particularly in the Italian Gardens area, which is close to them, and have some kind of regard to social responsibility. This business does not. It is the source. I know it's the responsibility of the people buying the stuff, who are then members of the public, who are then littering and not bothering to walk as far as a bin. But it is generated by this business, and there doesn't seem to be any active attempts to encourage their clientele. I don't think there's even any signage. I'm not sure now, but I don't think there doesn't seem to be any active attempts to encourage clientele to dispose of their waste considerately, and it is becoming unsightly.
Neil, thank you for that. I don't think Steve needs to come back on any of those. Do you, Steve? No, he's shaking his head. Take all the points on board you said, and I think Ben did mention this is exceptional times, and during the lockdown with a nice bit of weather, people couldn't get food from restaurants inside. Very, very exceptional circumstances, so we must bear that in mind as well. But Christine, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just really want to talk about the litter problem. A couple of months ago, and obviously, as already has been explained, COVID-19 has caused people to want to stand outside rather than congregate inside the shop. And I'm sure that will continue for some time to come. But at some stage, hopefully, in the very near future, COVID-19 won't be a consideration and people will be able to return to queuing inside the shop. A couple of months ago, I actually visited Penarth. I went from Penarth Marina right down to Lavenant Point from about 7:30 on a Sunday morning, around about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was appalled at the amount of rubbish that was literally littered completely on the route everywhere. And it wasn't the fault of people that were buying the fish and chips. Actually, partly it was our fault, the council's fault, because there were bins and they were absolutely overflowing with rubbish, and people had tried to accumulate the rubbish near the bins, but obviously it was quite windy and it had blown everywhere. When I came back, I actually wrote to Colin Smith and I asked him what he could do to try and alleviate some of the waste down there. And he came back to me and he did do some further work on it. And he did agree that they needed another team there. You know, there was one lone person that had come from somewhere else and they just had one picker and one van. And there was a colossal amount of waste. Now I can see under condition 5, what we're suggesting is that there's 5 bins placed outside the fish and chip shop. I'd like to see something a bit more proactive here, in that if you buy fish and chips, there's something stamped on your fish and chips to say, you know, please put this in the bin. There's 5 bins out the shop. If you come back and put your waste in the bin, we'll give you a free ice cream or something. You know, because most people that are buying these fish and chips are walking away with it, and then we as a council are having to provide more people to pick it up.
I agree with you entirely, but unfortunately, I don't think this is a planning matter, Christine. It is one of my bugbears. I'd love to see registration numbers put on drive-throughs as well, but I don't think we can do much about this. I know, again, our teams have been under extreme pressure during lockdown because things are so different, but if you're happy, I don't think you really needed an answer, did you? On there weren't any planning issues there, so I'll move on to Andrew, and I think that's us done. Then I will ask for somebody to move a motion after Andrew. Andrew Parker, please.
Steve or Vicky, can you put the photograph up of the front elevation, please, if that's practical? There we are. That's fine. Now, my concern actually is for people using the footway. As you can see, there's actually quite a steep curb there, and I'm not aware that if you're on a wheelchair or a pram that you could actually get onto the closed-off parking area at the moment. Similarly, it's also blocked off by all the barrels. So two prams or 2 wheelchair users actually couldn't pass on that pavement. Vicky might know, is there a one-way system, not that anybody sort of follows it, that actually would show it, but I certainly think that we need to get some advice on wheelchair and on the use by disabled people.
I'll say this again, this isn't really relevant to this planning application.
It's a highway matter.
Sorry, but a lot of this stuff is there because of COVID. But Steve, yeah, you'd like to come in.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just to point out that the officer has told me that there is currently a TRO, I think, for that area has gone through consultation process. So obviously looking at formalising how things are going to work with COVID, etc. So you know that may well include facilitating access between the highway and the raised pavement, etc. But say I think that is going to be reported to Cabinet. So but the information on that TRO is out there. But as you say, it is actually separate to this application.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So nobody else wanting to talk on this then? Well, nobody's going to move. I will move. Can I have a second? Oh, Ian, did you want to come in? Yeah, Ian.
Sorry, Chair, I was also going to move, so I'll second. It's a takeaway, an extra of each. I'll second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we've had it moved and seconded. I will quickly ask, are there people going to vote against this? Yeah, okay, so we need to run through our usual. Yes,
Chair, sorry, just for clarification, you just confirm that you're moving officers' recommendations, just for the record.
Yes, that's right. I'm moving and Ian Johnson was seconding. We will now run through the voting procedure. So I will vote for. Vice Chairman, I believe you're going to vote against, yes?
Sorry, I turned my camera off rather than unmuting. Yes, voting against officer recommendations.
Thank you very much. Rhiannon Birch, please.
4.
Thank you. Christine Cave.
4.
Thank you. Pam Drake.
4.
Thank you. Vince Driscoll.
I missed most of the arguments, Chair, due to bad signal.
We'll leave you out of the vote then. Thanks, Vince.
Okay.
Stuart Edwards.
4 officer recommendation.
Thank you, Stuart. Nick Hodges.
4.
Thank you. Ian Johnson.
4.
Thank you. Gordon Kemp.
4.
Thank you. Andrew Parker.
4.
Thank you. Leighton Rowlands.
4.
Thank you. Neil Thomas.
Abstain.
Thank you. Margaret Wilkinson. No, I know Margaret has been having IT issues, so I'll put a no vote down for Margaret as well. Eddie Williams.
For the office recommendations.
Thank you. Mark Wilson. Mark, has he disappeared, has he? Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh,
I
you
am
are?
here.
Yeah.
But I abstained because I didn't hear most of the debate. I had connection issues.
Okie doke. Thank you, Mark, for that. So with 1 vote against and the rest for, that is carried. So that moves us on to 2020-881 full 98 South Road, Sully. We do have a public speaker on it. I don't think there are any matters arising on it, but I believe Vicky is going to lead us through the planning application. Then I will ask Mrs. Lyas to speak on it, and we will take it from there. So Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully members can see the photographs I'm sharing and the plans on screen. This application relates to a property on South Road in Sully, and it's a retrospective application for the fence that you can see in the photograph sharing on the screen now. And the reason it's before you at Planning Committee is that the recommendation is for refusal, but also for enforcement action to be taken to remove the fence. As you'll see from the report, we because there are permitted development rights up to 1 metre in height adjacent to a highway, the enforcement action would be to reduce either to remove the fence or to reduce it in height down to what would be permitted development, so 1 metre in height. As the report refers to, there was part of the fence is actually a gate. I'm just trying to find, there you go, you can see in the historic photo the gate element at the access into the site has been there historically in between the 2 hedges, and that's actually lawful now. So there's no action that we can take about the gate. Obviously, it's just the timber within it has been replaced. So this matter only relates to the fence that's been erected to replace the hedge that you can see there. So hopefully that explains what we are considering. Clearly, given the recommendation, officers have assessed this one in terms of its visual impact. We consider that there is visual harm caused by the erection of the fence, and there are photographs which, again, members hopefully will have had an opportunity to see before this meeting. They've been circulated. These photos show South Road, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in terms of it being one of the main routes through Sully, between Barry and Penarth. And so there's a mix of different house types, mix of street scene, but there is a real character of sort of low-level open enclosures along the frontage, a mix of hedges and low-level walls and railings, as you can see from some of these photos. And this fence really, given its height and the materials used, we feel detracts from the character of that street scene and is harmful, therefore. And that's why we're recommending refusal of the planning application and the necessary enforcement action be taken. There was a matters arising comment, which hopefully members have seen, and that was just that the local ward members, councillors Penrose and Marnie, have confirmed that they agree with the officer's recommendation and are object to the fence as it currently stands and support the enforcement action. But I think I'll hand over back to you, Chair, and to the public speakers.
Thank you, Vicky. Yes, sorry, I did pick up about the matters arising afterwards, and Christine picked me up on it as well. Thank you. And Christine has asked to speak. So once we've done public speaking, Christine, you're first on the list. But that brings us to public speaking time now. And we have Mrs. Lias. Is Mrs. Lias there? Yes, she is there. I can see a picture. And you are going to speak. You will have 3 minutes from now, really.
It's actually, yeah. I'm speaking on her behalf, Jonathan Hill. I did contact Gareth Davis earlier to explain that.
That's fine. Over to you then.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, the erection of the fence replaces an earlier fence, which in turn was brought down by the historic hedge there. The hedge thinned over time, allowing access through. Mrs. Lias runs a very useful and essential childminding service for local residents in Sully, and it is essential that she's able to keep children in her charge from getting out onto what is a very busy road, and which from your photographs you can see that people mount the pavement and park up for the pharmacy for the most part, and in previous years for the post office. The hedge was previously sufficient for that, but it thinned over time, and now it is a danger. The aesthetics mentioned, if one looks at the photograph presented by the planning officer just a moment ago, you will actually see a number of high walls and fences along South Road, certainly going back down towards the old school, and also near the bus stop that's in the photograph that isn't highlighted very well in the angle it's taken. But there are a number of walls and wooden fences which are similar in height to this one. The difficulty the aesthetics bring in relation to this is that the gate would stay in place no matter what. If the enforcement action that is proposed is put into effect, you will have a certainly jarring disparity in height between a fence which will no longer have the effect of being able to keep children inside the property, but will now be at odds with the existing fence, which of course slides down the run of the existing fence, and in the absence of a fence of similar height could cause a danger to members of the public if they were leaning on or looking through the fence at the time, as the gate slides too, apart from being aesthetically displeasing. And if the gate is also left open, it's going to be covering that part of the fence in any event. The wood itself is not, and I would dispute the characterization of it as being of material that is in some way incongruous. It's good quality wood. It can be finished in a number of finishes or colors, depending on what the planning committee might require. It could be painted green, so that it is virtually indistinguishable at a glance from the previous hedge that was there. There are a number of ways in which the visual effect of that wood can be affected. But also the refusal of planning permission in respect to that fence would be with a number of other developments around, particularly around the corner in Western Avenue, where number 3 has had a similar development approved with a dwarf wall in the context of a street which is much shorter. Development took up a larger amount.
Mark, did you say time up on that one?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry to put you off there. It is a 3-minute thing. If you can just hang on a sec, just to see if there are any points that anybody wants clarified from what you've said. I can't see anybody waving at me, and I can't see anything on the chat. No, okay, thank you very much. We will now go on to debate this. And I have 2 people have indicated to me already, Christine Cave and Ben Gray. So, and Andrew's indicating as well. So I will ask Christine to come in first, please.
Thank you for that, Chair. I just, obviously we're not able to go out at the moment and do site visits, and I can understand that. And we were given the photographs, some of which have been shown here today, and I had a good look at them. I actually went on to Google's Maps because I only know this area very slightly. I've travelled down the road before myself. I was asked not to visit, like we were all asked not to visit. So I thought, well, I'll go on to Google Maps and I'll have a look. And actually, if you go down this road, as has already been pointed out, there are, I think, an array of different heights and different materials, you know, from large 15-foot conifers to actually on the other side of the road, there is a block of garages, I can see them from Google Maps, that they actually are sideways in the plot. There's actually two properties that have been quite newish properties that have been built. It's by the shop, the one-stop shop, and there are actually a row of garages, and the end of the garage block actually sits on the road in a similar way as this fence sits on the road. It abuts the pavement. And this block of garages is built out of yellow brick, like an old stock brick, and it is much, much, much higher than this fence. And so I you know, not being able to visit, and you know, that obviously that's an issue for us. This, I've done what I think I had to do to be able to form some sort of understanding of what we're being asked to look at here. And I do think that, you know, there is this fence replaces the hedge. It's no taller than the hedge that was removed, and as has already been pointed out, actually if it's painted green, you know, maybe the problem will go away. But I can't see why we are asking for a reduction in this hedge. I really can't, because I think there's a real eclectic mix of different ways that residents have found to screen themselves from the ever increasing road noise and road traffic, which, you know, obviously is going up year on year, especially as we are, as a planning committee, giving more and more development in the Surrey area.
Thank you, Christine. Vicky, do you want to come in now, or shall I ask for the other speakers to come in? Yeah, I think we'll run through the questions and then you can kind of take them on board. Okay, so I've got Ben next. I can see Ian. So I've got Ben, Andrew Parker and Ian Johnson. And I will ask Ben to come in now, and then perhaps we'll go to Vicky, and then we'll have another two and work it like that. So Ben, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to public speakers as well for articulating the point. I know we've moved past questions of clarification now, but in terms of what was put forwards, I don't know that I'm bought into the argument that a 1 metre fence can't withstand a child inside of it, but maybe I'm wrong. In terms of this question of painting a fence green, we had this at planning committee previously in Llantwit Major, and I'm certainly not going to change the way I voted previously. I understood the reasoning and I understood the actions being put forwards and the permitted developments in terms of front garden use. So I would move officer recommendations around opposing the application and authorising the enforcement action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Right, Vicky, did you want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, to a certain extent, I would just say it is somewhat subjective when you're looking at whether or not you think something causes visual harm and whether or not you think the materials are appropriate. I take the point, and I did try to make the point that this is a mixed street scene. There are all different house types. There are you know, there's no consistent building line, there's no consistent boundary enclosure, but there is a degree of openness for the most part, and we feel that if this were to be allowed, many others could do the same, and then there would be an overall harmful effect from having, you know, close board fencing all along the frontage of what is the main through road through Surrey, and you know, that can look very harmful. I don't think that painting it green has the same visual effect as a hedge itself. I can't agree with that, I'm afraid. I agree that painting it green or perhaps a darker shade would probably improve the appearance from what it currently is, I don't think that that alone would make the fence acceptable. And obviously, you know, that is a view that is supported by both local ward members here in Selly, who also, you know, have objected and agree with the recommendation here.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And yes, I agree. I think that just straightforward painting is not the answer. I think it could be made acceptable with some design changes and some shaping and maybe some pillars and things like that. But at the moment, it's just corridoring that road as far as I'm concerned. But who am I to think? But Andrew Parker wanted to come in next. Andrew.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would support the local ward member, Bob Penrose, as well. I think the height of the fence is clearly excessive. I think it's 1 metre or 1.1 is allowed under permitted development, which is normal and acceptable. Slightly curious as to the fact that we're trying to keep the little children in. Is this a domestic property or is it a nursery school? I'm not sure whether Vicky or Steve can actually comment on that, but I will second the officer's recommendation.
Yes, sorry, Councillor. I've just been discussing the matter with Marcus, who's the enforcement officer for the site, and I think they're operating under permitted development for child minding for less than 6 children at the property. Well, certainly that's how they've presented the situation to us.
Okay, thank you. Just
yes,
Andrew,
thank you, Steve. That's fine. Thank you.
I heard you seconding. I haven't heard somebody propose it, have I? Or perhaps I missed it.
Ben proposed it.
Okay, so as Ben has proposed it, you've seconded it. I've got Ian Johnson wanting to speak next, and then I've got Mark Wilson wanting to come on. So Ian, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to say that I thought the public speaker made their case very well, certainly in terms of the height of the existing gate and sort of the wider street scene. And if it hadn't already been moved, I would probably actually have been recommending or suggesting a deferral to allow further discussion on this. So I think I'm interested as to. I think we judging by the comments so far, people agree that that the current aesthetic is not the best, but that there should be a solution to it. I appreciate that the officer will probably tell me that they want to refuse and have the enforcement powers in order to force their hand to make changes. But I think that it seems to me that the public speaker, the applicant, is already willing to make changes whilst also recognising and taking into consideration the safety issues that they've referred to as well. So I feel actually a little uncomfortable in it feels like how to crack a nut in doing the refusal and the enforcement when it seems to me that they've expressed willingness to move forward with this with making changes. And to be honest, I'd like to see the officers, sort of having what appears to be a better discussion with them about potential outcomes. What it's like at the moment isn't really acceptable, but I'm not sure that that an alternative that seems acceptable has also been put forward by officers as to what it should look like. Because what it would look like if you had that, 1 metre 8 gate with a 1 metre high fence or hedge or whatever. Also, I don't think would be a good look on that in the aesthetic and street scene. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I see and hear exactly where you're coming from, but I do see our planning officer's side of it as well, because if they were to continue talks and we approved this or whatever, or put it on hold, and talks broke down, there would be a nowhere to go. Whereas if we give them the enforcement and turn it down, there is a free go for the applicant. They get a free go for a resubmission. So that would give everybody the opportunity to get this design right and get it changed to something that's acceptable to all, and it wouldn't lead us into a stalemate position. But I know Mark Wilson wants to come in on this as well, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, I take Councillor Johnson's points, and I think he's made a good point in terms of discussing the application a bit further. And I got nothing against that idea, but if you think it's going to frustrate the process, and I'm just wondering, perhaps I got a couple of questions really about the fence and obviously the shrubs that need to be grown. It's going to take some time to grow those shrubs to get to a reasonable height. And perhaps maybe we could look at looking at an application whereby, you know, the fencing could stay for a while until the shrubs are grown to a reasonable level. And therefore we could take away the fencing once it's achieved that certain height that, you know, that everyone feels comfortable with. And I wonder perhaps is there something that the planners could consider?
I don't think we're particularly talking about shrubs, Mark. I think it doesn't have to be shrubs. It could be just changes in design with pillars or whatever.
Okay, so thank you for that. That's helpful then, because I think obviously, you know, if there is something like that, then clearly I think we do need to think about more discussion then in that case about the applicant.
By refusing this and giving enforcement powers, it gives us the means to have a full and frank discussion. The applicant gets a free go, a free resubmission, so it doesn't cost them anything. Yet, if you know, we don't end up with a stalemate scenario where we've approved something on the grounds of hoping that discussions work out. You know, it comes in. I see Vicky waving madly at me. I'm probably all wrong on what I'm saying, but Vicky, yeah, you'll put us right on this, I'm sure.
No, it's fine. I support what you say, Chair, and I just want to sort of reassure members that we don't bring enforcement matters to planning committee lightly, and I'm sure you all recognise that you don't actually see that many enforcement reports, and that's absolutely no reflection of the amount of enforcement work that we do, which is huge, very significant. It comes to this when we have a planning application that is before us, and clearly the public speaker did indicate, you know, they're willing to perhaps paint the fence, that sort of thing, and as I've said, officers don't think that would be good enough in terms of addressing the concern. You know, sometimes you do have to you know, show your cards really and recognise that you are prepared to refuse and take action if negotiations are unsuccessful. So, you know, I would obviously support members going with officers' recommendations here. It doesn't mean that's the end of the road. It doesn't mean we can't still continue to talk to the applicant about alternative proposals that may be acceptable. And obviously that does give us a sort of strong hand in which to have those discussions and negotiations, because if they fail, we can then pursue enforcement action. The applicant would still have a right of appeal against both the refusal of the planning permission and the enforcement action. So that's all I wanted to say really in response to those points.
Lovely, thank you. I've had Christine asking some clarification on a point. Christine, what would you like clarified?
A couple of points actually, just for clarification. I'm not sure what the officer's alternative proposal is for this fence. It's obviously not to be kept in its current height. It's not to be painted, but I'm not quite sure what it is what the officers are suggesting. And secondly, I just wondered, Councillor Johnson, I didn't quite catch all of everything you said because the reception is not brilliant, but were you suggesting a proposal for a deferral?
I'd be happy to propose a deferral. I don't know where that sits in terms of the
I really don't think that helps, because it leads to a stalemate position, a deferral. I don't know. I mean, if you want to propose it, you're more than entitled to, but I try and encourage you not to. I think we've explained there is a clear and relatively simple process that doesn't stop negotiation. In fact, it encourages negotiation.
Chair.
Yes.
Chair. So I was just going to say we've got a valid motion moving officers' recommendations, so that would be heard first anyway, wouldn't it? Yeah. So if we voted on that, if you wanted to vote on that, and then if that isn't successful, then there'd be a position to raise a different motion if required.
Lovely. Thank you, James, for sorting me and us out. So I think I've got through the.
Can I raise a point of order, Chair? Can I raise a point of order? A procedural point of order. What the lawyer said. I mean, normally, if someone's moving an amendment, surely we consider the amendment first, and then if the amendment passes, it then becomes part of the substantive motion. Surely we should be doing that. And the lawyer.
It wasn't an amendment.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the point
Mark,
I'm making.
yeah, Mark, you are right. If Ian was motioning an amendment, then you would vote on the amendment first, and then if it was amended or not, you'd vote on what the outcome of that was. I think what was being discussed here was a separate motion for a deferral, which isn't an amendment of the original.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Right, Ian.
Sorry, I don't want to delay anything any further. I mean, I've certainly been in meetings where a deferral has taken precedence over the main motion, because the purpose of the deferral is to say that actually we want something different to happen. I'm happy in this case for the main motion, to be heard. But in a process sense, I've certainly been in meetings where a deferral, or I remember deferrals taking precedence over the main motion, even if it's on the table, because the deferral, would be a position of committee to ask for further information or to move something to the next meeting.
That's what I concur as well. I concur with that. I concur with that, absolutely.
Hang on a minute. Now I'm going to cut you off.
You interrupted me earlier.
I'll let James come back in. You're all having a go on this.
I was just going to say, I think from a procedural perspective, I think you probably could do that if the people who brought the original motion agreed to allow the deferral motion to take precedence.
And that is how we have done it in the past, as I recall. But whatever it has been done in the past doesn't make whatever's being done right at the moment. But I think we're none of us are arguing the case here. Nobody's upset with what we're doing or whatever. We have had a mover and a seconder. Ian has said he's not, he's not unhappy that we're going to go to the vote. So let's go to the vote, see where the vote takes us. And then, yes, Vicky is indicating before I take you to the vote, then let Vicky come in on.
Sorry, my dog wants to speak to you all as well, I think. I just wanted to come back to Christine's point about she wasn't clear about what officers were suggesting might be acceptable. And I can't honestly sort of disclose that really as part of planning committee. That's part of a negotiation. There would be several different options that may or may not be acceptable. Clearly, our preference would probably be, look, go back to how the hedge was, because clearly that looked, very nice and a nice green buffer. But as Councillor Wilson's referred to, that's going to take some while to grow back. So we'd look at other options, whether or not, having regard to the fallback of a metre height fence, would that be acceptable? Or would something actually look better? Having regard to the existing gate that the speaker talked about, and Jonathan's mentioned pillars possibly. We can look at colours and materials and so on to address both the concerns in terms of safety, but also the visual impact of it really. Usually we'd prefer to have brick, stone, render type walls along prominent road frontages like this. So that's the sort of thing we'd be encouraging, but I couldn't tell you categorically only this is going to be acceptable. There's any number of solutions here, I think.
Super, thank you very much, Vicky. And I think I can see Christine nodding. She's kind of happy with that. So, all right, I've got one last person to come in now. Andrew, you want to come in, but we are going to go to a vote.
Only to try and bring some sanity to it and to support the officer's recommendation. Clearly, they are allowed to make a new application. If it is successful, it will be dealt with under delegated powers, and we won't hear of it again. But clearly, what is proposed at the moment is thoroughly unacceptable in street terms, and I again support the officer's recommendation.
Yeah, okay, right. So we've had a mover and a seconder. Thank you all. Very contentious for a little garden fence, but here we go. So I guess we'll go through the vote, and I'm going to go for officer's recommendation and with enforcement powers. I will ask Ben Gray as the next one, please.
4 officer recommendations, and I take it as read the enforcement part. So 4 officer recommendations.
Thank you. Rhiannon Birch, please.
4 officers' recommendations.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Christine Kay, please.
Against.
Thank you. Pam Drake.
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Vince Driscoll.
Against officers' recommendation.
Thank you, Vince. Stuart Edwards.
Abstain.
Thank you, Stuart. Nick Hodges.
For, Chairman.
Thank you, Nick. Ian Johnson.
For.
Thank you, Ian. Gordon Kemp.
Against.
Thank you. Andrew Parker.
For officers' recommendation.
Thank you. Leighton Rowlands.
Against.
Thank you, Leighton. Neil Thomas.
For officers' recommendations. Oops. Yeah.
Thank
For.
you. Yeah, I got that, Neil. Thank you. Margaret, I don't think is with us. I can't see her on the list. So I'll go to Eddie Williams.
For officers' recommendation.
Thank you, Eddie. Mark Wilson.
For recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. And Margarita is not with us. So that gives us 4 against, 1 abstention, and the rest, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I make it 4. So that clearly is carried. We obviously have faith in our officers that they will come to an agreement and get something sorted during the interim period, and fully expect there to be a new application, and this will probably be sorted without our intervention again. But that leads me to agenda item 5. And there is nothing on agenda item 5 or agenda item 6. I will thank you all for your attendance, your tolerance and patience, and your input, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you. Cheers now.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Good, John.
Chair.